Good evening from Jakarta, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone joining from other parts of the world. Welcome to the first Global Town Hall series of the year on the election in Indonesia, the United States, and India. What is the scorecard for the world's three largest democracies? I'm Dito, and I'll be the master of ceremony for today's discussion. In addition to the annual flagship event, the Global Town Hall has now convened regular, smaller scale discussions intended to create a platform for conversation among the civil societies. The theme of the discussion will range from geopolitics, climate, food security, technology, and many more. So please look forward to the upcoming Global Town Hall series. Today, I'm pleased to welcome over 300 participants registered to this discussion. We have attendees from 31 countries. To name some but not all, we have Afghanistan, Ghana, Angola, Nepal, Nigeria, Denmark, the United States, and many more, making this a real global town hall. Today's discussion will focus on assessing the world's three largest democracy, which will have their election this year. We have the pleasure of welcoming three remarkable speakers, representing a few from the United States, Indonesia, and also India. So please welcome, we have Dr. Brian Brooks, Associate Professor of Political Science in Tulane University, and also the founder of Brooks Research. We have Pak Bambang Harimurti, Commissioner at Tempo, and we also have Gurjit Singh, author and consulting editor of Rising Asia Journal, and also Honorary Professor of International Relations at Indian Institute of Technology, Indore. And now, without further ado, allow me to hand over discussion to our moderator today, Dr. Dino Patijalal, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Pak Dino, you may have the screen.
Thank you, Dito, for that introduction. I want to welcome also all the participants from so many countries who are joining this very interesting discussion, which I have been very much looking forward to. Indonesia, United States, and India are not just the world's three largest democracies. They are also considered mature democracies, meaning they've gone through numerous elections and many peaceful transfer of powers. I remember President Bill Clinton once said that a functioning democracy is judged by twice peaceful political turnovers through elections. Certainly, United States, Indonesia, and India have done plenty of that. Indonesia since particularly 1998. So the question I want to ask to the panelists, as each of our country faces elections this year, Indonesia in February, next week, 2 days from now, and then India in early summer, maybe April and May, and United States in early November. What do you see to be the challenges faced by your democracies? Yeah, maybe I'll start with Dr. Brian, and then Gurjit, and then Pak Bambang. Yeah, Dr. Brian, 3 or 4 minutes.
Yes, thank you, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The United States faces several challenges related to this election, but the biggest one I would point out is the political polarization that is prevalent in our country. Many Americans are divided not just between the political parties and the candidates they support, but their political ideologies and entire worldview, even to the point that many Americans are now living in communities where they don't typically interact with members of the other political party or supporters of the other political party. So many Americans are getting a worldview from friends, neighbors, coworkers, and especially polarized media, news, information, so that people tend to see a one-sided view of American politics, and they become upset, and they do not understand how people, and even in our own country, could come to different conclusions and support different policies. So I would say that the biggest challenge facing American democracy as we head into our election year is just this division that's rooted in our partisan coalitions.
Sorry, Dr. Brian, just a quick follow-up. U.S. elections have always been polarized, as far as I remember. Do you think that this year's election is going to be particularly more polarizing than ever?
Than ever, perhaps not than ever. We were particularly polarized in the early 1800s, in the 1850s, in the 1860s, and 1870s. We were polarized in the 1930s. We were probably going to be similarly divided as we have been for perhaps the last 10 or 15 years, but it's clearly a more divided and separated country than, say, in the 1970s and 80s. Yes, we've had political parties and they've wanted different things, and they've had different coalitions of supporters, but just this extreme ideological division has really been a product of the last 15 or 20 years in the United States, and it's more severe than it's been in many of our lifetimes. In American history, we've had greater periods of polarization, but for most Americans that are going to be voting this November, this is perhaps one of the most divided times they've seen in their lifetime.
Thank you. Dr. Gurjit Singh from India, tell me about the democracy challenges in India.
I think first is the sheer size. 968 million voters, out of which the sharpest increase this time is of young voters who are between the 18-19 age group, increased by 23% from the last 5 years, 18.5 million more. This is the biggest challenge. The second challenge is you have to hold the elections over 28 states. So we end up doing it over several days, and the results all come out on one day. But you have to secure the election in a very large country for several days, weeks. The other challenge is that the political education of young people is faltering. Most of them are, graduates of the WhatsApp university. They don't think too deeply. They go by emotive reactions to what is said in a populist way, and they tend to vote that way. As a result, let us say the certain identity politics of their fathers is not followed by them anymore, so the predictability of the election becomes that much more difficult. They tend to vote in waves now rather than on issues. Finally, I think the biggest challenge is that given the differentiation of the number of seats each state has in the Lok Sabha, the parliament, there are, I think, 5 states which dominate the entire. If you win those 5 states, you are done. And these 5 states are Uttar Pradesh, where I live, which has 80 seats out of 543. There is Maharashtra, 48. There is Bengal, 42. There is Bihar, 40. And there is Tamil Nadu, 39. Now, the ruling party, which actually runs 17 states, only runs one of these states, UP. So it has been busy in changing the governments in some of these states. It has succeeded in Maharashtra, just succeeded recently in Bihar. So it has won over those governments who have changed over. So this competitive federal politics is impacting the national election. Thank you.
Can't hear your voice,
Okay, sorry. Just a quick follow-up. I've always thought that in India, they're quite ideological in their politics there. Do you think in this year's elections they're becoming less ideological?
So I think from the time that Prime Minister Modi and the BJP have come to power, particularly in their second election in 2019. I don't think there's any ideology. We don't have a bipartisan policy. We have 8 national parties, 55 regional parties, and 2,000 plus other parties, all of whom fight the election. Now, from all accounts, the BJP has moved center stage, which the Congress was for nearly 50 years. So today, whatever happens in the elections, the core focus is on the BJP. And therefore, that is the dominant single party. So there is no question of ideology here now. Every day you see people from the other parties walking into the BJP, even today, because they see no future of their party elsewhere. So there is no ideology as far as I can see. It is praxis, practical politics.
Okay. Bambang, Indonesian elections 2 days from now. We're all very excited. So what are the challenges of democracy that you see?
Well, the biggest challenge, I think, is the integrity of the election itself, because clearly a lot of people, especially intellectuals, think that this election is not designed in a fair environment. Yeah, it's so much prop up for the candidate that is endorsed by the government. So I'm a bit worried if, let's say, the Mr. Prabowo and Gibran win the first round, but with a very small difference, because that, I think, will create many protests. Yeah. So that is my main worry. Although that possibility of a first round is small, but it's not zero. So that is something that we have to think. And the second is, of course, even though we have, like India, more young voters, but political memory is, as also seem to happen in the Philippines, is not very long. And we might have a big decline in our democracy, not in a big drop, but going surely but slowly declining, which is, I think, more dangerous. And also the fact that in Indonesia now, as opposed to last election and previous elections before that, this is now most or majority of the voters is not deciding who is the best of the candidate for our president, but who is the least problematic for them. So that's why you only see the polarization among the small elites, but in the grassroots there are more confusion than any polarization. So that's another challenge. So I think probably participation rate will also a bit lower than before. That's my 2 cents anyway.
Bambang, you mentioned about erosion of democracy in Indonesia. Can you describe that? What is the evidence that democratic conditions are declining?
Well, I think if you look at so many measurement, for instance, if you look at Freedom House, Indonesia managed to have the category of free between 2006 to 2013, I think. Yeah. But since then, we are only partly free, most not because of political situation though, but civil liberties. But after that, also political situation is also declining, because, for instance, one of the example in political arena is now only party that has 20% of chair or 25% of votes can have the right to nominate a candidate. Yeah, that make it our choice, the menu on the election, very much influenced by what maybe we call oligarchy, not really the choice of the common people. Yeah. And if you look at other situation, for instance, the fact that more than half of our province now is not governed by elected leaders, but by people appointed by president, and also 182 of regency level, which is about what 1/3. So this is giving the election tilt toward the benefit of whoever got supported by the current government. Yeah. So that's why I think the big problem we face is the integrity of this election, whether it can be considered fair or not. Yeah. So this is we have to watch this.
Got that. Dr. Brian, I remember when President Trump was elected, President Obama commented that now the strength of our institutions are about to be tested, right? And I think for democracies, really the metrics is how strong the institutions are, and not the personalities, right? I'm just wondering if you can comment on what is the strength, the resilience of the institutions in the United States today, and what is the degree of public trust in those institutions?
Well, that was about to be a very, I think, positive answer until the second part in terms of degree of public trust. So this is an interesting dynamic in the United States right now. I think our institutions themselves are still fairly strong, but we have fairly negative public opinion toward institutions, strong disapproval of the United States Congress, so our national parliament, strong disapproval of our federal court system, and generally our two political parties are not well liked. And this is perhaps seems odd given my earlier comments that we are so divided in terms of our party identities and our party affiliation, but many Americans pick their candidates and pick their parties less so about affiliation with one party as much as it's dislike of the other choice. And given we're kind of a two-party dominant system, it's one or the other, and many Americans just so don't like one of them that they tend to work with and support another. But back to institutions, I think our institutions at this point are still working fairly well. We have a fairly decentralized election administration system. Our states and local governments are the ones that actually administer elections. We have, state and local legislative bodies that continue to pass laws that tend to be the ones that regulate American life on a daily basis. Our national legislature is divided in terms of the party control of our two chambers, so they're not getting a lot done. But it's operating according to the rules. So while it's unpopular, it is not necessarily failing as a democratic institution. It's actually working as our founders designed it to work, which is to be in paralysis when there isn't agreement. The biggest, I think, question mark for American institutions is the strength of our court system and the rule of law. And at this point, and just related to that, the independence of prosecutorial power. Many Americans see the use of prosecution and our court system to be politically motivated. As somebody who studies this, I don't see that, but many Americans, depending on how the courts are deciding, whether it's in criminal matters or in terms of how our federal courts are interpreting and perhaps invalidating our laws. We have a judicial review with our Supreme Court. Many Americans are not pleased with that. But at this point, I'm not sure I would say that the institutions themselves are failing or working in a way other than which they are designed. So I am concerned about kind of this mismatch between the institutions themselves and public, the lack of public support for them. But at the moment, institutions seem to be holding.
Thank you. Gurjit, how about in India's case? What is the degree of public trust in institutions? And can you tell us which institutions are the most trusted and which is the least trusted? In Indonesia, the Anti-Corruption Commission used to be the most trusted until they had some problems recently. Yeah, go ahead.
I think generally in India, most institutions at this moment are seen as losing trust. But that, I think, stems from the sheer dominance of a party over the country's polity. So the people who oppose that party look for the judiciary or executive arms or the legislature for that matter to challenge the dominance of the party and don't find sustenance there. So they then feel that the ruling party is dominating. But I have not seen the Supreme Court of India, for instance, strike down anything that the government did, which may not have been to the agreement of the previous ruling parties. So therefore, this question of public trust in today's world of social media becomes a little more delicate because you have waves of social media saying one thing and then a counter trolling on the other side, which tends to confuse matters. But when you go to the Supreme Court or you go to an election, I think you get fairly clear results. We have an election commission which has always conducted elections in India. The election commissioners were always appointed by the government. But now there is a contention that these guys are not independent, we should change. So now the government brought in legislation that election commissioners will be appointed by a committee which includes the leader of the opposition, which earlier it was not so. Now that seems to be a better way. But people find fault with elections when they keep losing them. Now we have, unlike the United States or Indonesia, our elections are entirely conducted by electronic voting machines. Various efforts to challenge their veracity have been attempted and not succeeded. And yet, when somebody loses an election, they say, oh, the EVMs were tampered. But the same EVMs have led to the BJP losing elections in some states in recent months. So I am not quite certain that the challenge of trust is genuine or is it political. But the youth of this country seems to be very happy to go out and vote. And last time we had 67% voter turnout, which is the highest ever. I think this time it will cross 70% because young people are getting politicized, if not necessarily politically educated.
Okay, thank you. Pa Bambang, I want to ask you about the issue of money politics. I think in most democracies, this is a problem. And I want to get Dr. Brian's comment on this after Bambang. But I think the enemy of one of the biggest enemies of any democracy is money politics. How money interferes in political decisions through corruption, bribery, and nepotism, collusion, and so many ways. I'm just wondering how bad is the challenge of money politics in Indonesia's elections, and can that ever be fixed? And after that, I would like to get Dr. Brian to comment. Yeah, Pak Bambang.
Thank you. This is a very good question, Pak Dino. There has just been released research by one of our friend, Pak Burhanuddin, about money politics, and it's very interesting. The result is that about 1/3 of voters claim that they have faced money politics in their life. So it's a very sizable. But when they were asked whether that money politics make them decide according to the one who give the money, only 10% say. So this 10% can be viewed as very bad or not bad, depend on the situation. But given the current situation in Indonesia, because some of the difference between candidate in elections is less than 10%, I'm talking about the legislative election, for instance. So this 10% then become very, very, quite important in making someone lose or win an election. And because of that, then the influence of the donors, which is usually the super rich people, becoming quite high, or sometimes popularly stated as basically the election has been captured by the oligarchs. Yeah? Of course, the remedy need to be given, and there are some remedies that can be recommended. But the number one, I think, is to ensure that the political parties have sufficient fund to be sustainable. And I think for a country like Indonesia, I think it's better that the political party is supported by public fund, which they have to account in a transparent matter in sufficient number, so that if you are the Secretary General of political parties, you don't have to rely on this private political donor just to pay the salaries of people who works in the political parties. Yeah, and I have done some research into that, and there is also some research by our institution, including the anti-corruption agencies. In 2017, for instance, political parties need something like 27,000 rupiah per voters per year for them to be not worry about their overhead costs and so on. So I think if we just give each political party 50,000 rupiah per voter per year, we will have a much more independent and accountable political parties that not only catering to the oligarch, but thinking more about the interest of the public. Yeah, and then they will also support a presidential candidate that is for all the people, not for the benefit of the super rich or super influencers.
Thank you, Dr. Brian. What is the form of money politics in the United States? I'm sure it's a little bit different than the experience of Indonesia.
Yes, and this is something that, at university, sometimes we teach an entire semester's worth of course about the role of money in American politics. So I'll try to make 3 points very efficiently for our talk here. First, let me note to everybody in the audience that the United States has a freedom of speech provision in our Constitution that our court system takes very seriously. And as part of that, the court has interpreted our campaign finance laws to mean that the spending of money on political advertisements, particularly basically a political expression, to be equivalent to free speech. Therefore, it is very hard for government to regulate the use of money in political campaigns. So going into this election year, there will be lots and lots of money spent because it is free speech, and free speech is constitutionally protected. So that equivalence is something that many Americans don't like, but that is the current state of campaign finance law in the United States. The second point I would make is that our political parties are very well funded. Some of that comes from very, very large donors, but both political parties have become very, very strong at gathering large numbers of donors from very, 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 very small contributions. They call these small money contribution strategies, and it's largely done over email, text messaging, social media. The idea that somebody can give 5 or 10 American dollars very, very quickly, just using a mobile phone and a credit card in order to do this. And both political parties will be very, very well funded this year. But the third point I'll make, and then I'll stop on this, is that the American system is very unique in the sense that political parties raise a lot of money and political parties nominate candidates for elective office here. But the candidates are allowed to have separate campaigns from the party. So American elections are not just party-centric. The candidates can create their own campaign organizations, and that's key because they can also raise their own money. And this is where I'm a little bit more concerned about the state of money in American politics, because many candidates get into, well, politics because they're either independently wealthy or they have a certain personality that allows them to be attractive to donors. Essentially, what I'm going to kind of make the point that I'm concerned that we are not necessarily getting the best people putting themselves forward for office, because people that might actually be really well connected to their communities, they would be good representatives, they know a lot about the issues, they do not like the prospect of raising money. So just think about the kind of person that wants to go out and ask people for money. Those are the kind of people that are choosing to run for office, and they have to spend a lot of time running for office. One of my colleagues did a study on the campaign schedules, basically just how do candidates use their time, and they spend up to 40% of their time while awake raising money. And so this, I think, has perverse incentives for the types of people that we get into elective office. And so if you pay attention to American politics and you read on the news that some American politician has said something really controversial or really crazy or something that really angers you, that's not a mistake. That is by design, because they say things in order to generate attention, because that attention will motivate their donors. And almost always after they say things like this to the media, they then send out social media messages, electronic mail, asking their supporters for money. So the role of money, I think, we're going to have plenty of money. We're going to have plenty of political advertising and plenty of campaigning. But because of the way that our law is structured, it's having some perverse selection effects in terms of who runs for office.
Thank you. Gurjit, please comment on money politics in India, but also want you to speak a little bit about whether or not there is a factor of oligarchy that is the dominant in Indian politics, because, you know, in Indonesia, the Philippines, you know, elsewhere, people always talk about whoever rules, oligarchy rules. Is there such a thing going on in India? Yeah, but please connect it to money politics and also
let me tell you about oligarchy first. So
yes.
The Modi government labels the older rulers as the Lutyens Delhi, the people who are Delhi-based, English-speaking elite, who have basically run India maybe for 50, 60 years. Modi's government has brought in a non-English speaking elite, which has dismantled what is then called the Lutyens Delhi. So everybody now speaks in Hindi. They wear clothes like this, which are wearing rather than suits. So there is a whole change. So perhaps there is a new oligarchy coming. But with Modi, everything is so tightly controlled that you can't say, I'll go to ex-minister or so-and-so parliamentarian and cut a deal. That doesn't happen. So where is that oligarchy? We don't know. Old oligarchy demolished certainly. Now, coming to money power. Yes, election is won on money power. I believe every election in India contributes up to 2% of GDP for that year to the election process. Now, one, there is a sheer administrative expense. Then there are the electoral bonds through which companies can legitimately pay political parties by buying a bank bond. But finally, there is the illegal money. Now, in the Election Commission, they have got people from India's revenue service not deployed, because at time of every election, there are carloads and truckloads of cash found all over the country, because evidently cash is still being dispersed for votes. Now, whether that leads to real voting, I don't know. Are people just taking the money and voting who they wish for? Perhaps. So this is the picture over there. But there is a feeling that money continues to play a role and therefore must be curtailed. In the past, all government schemes were milked by brokers and then used for elections. Under the present regime for the last 10 years, all government benefits are given online into your bank accounts. So there is no broker milking the government system. But yes, a large number of beneficiaries are directly getting money and they feel benefited by the government of the day. So that is not illegal money, legal money, but it is creating political influence. Now, when Modi won the election for the first time, within a few months, a small party in Delhi came and beat them in Delhi and won the election. 5 years later, Modi won again, and this party in Delhi did it again. It's called the Aam Aadmi Party, the Common People's Party. They had no major funding. They did it largely through crowdfunding. And they came on the mantle of anti-corruption. Today, the Aam Aadmi Party runs Delhi and the state of Punjab, 2 states in India. The Congress Party itself runs only 3 states. So, in India, everything I say to you is true, but the exact opposite is also true. So here it is, a party which came on crowdfunding and actually is very popular. But traditional parties are finding it difficult to raise money. More and more money is heading towards what people expect the ruling party to be. And as per a recent poll, the BJP will get 40% vote share in the forthcoming election, 3% higher than last time. The Congress will retain 19%, but the BJP will get 335 seats, whereas the Congress alliance will get 160 seats when the majority is 272. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gojit. Pa Bambang, in Indonesia's elections now, I think various polls indicate that General Prabowo is leading. Some even say he may win over 50%, thus securing victory in the first round. I'm just wondering, there's a strong man image that he exudes that appeals to quite a lot of people in Indonesian, among Indonesian voters. But what explains this preference for strong man image? And also want to go back to Gurjit after this to comment on this seems to be also the image of Prime Minister Modi as the strong man. Again, if you can explain that, that would be very helpful. Yeah, Pak Bambang first.
Thank you for the questions. I think our problem sometimes is because we live in Jakarta and meeting people like Pak Dido Jalal. We think Indonesia is like that, but actually this is the exception than the rule, because most of Indonesian populations, education and economic wise, is still poorly educated and poor economically also, and so they don't want, they are so busy already just to survive. And for them, what is a good government is something that traditionally they always believe. They call it Ratu Adil, or a just king, that somebody given from God, somebody very powerful and very just, and can take care of them, and beat all the enemies, all the ogres and so on. So this longing for a powerful leader is, for them, is very normal, because they cannot participate in political works, because they are already overworked just to survive on everyday life. And I think this is not only for Indonesia, but for many countries where the people are basically still very traditional, and they actually too busy trying to survive for everyday life, that they just pray that they get these strong leaders that will solve all their problems. And I think in this way, General Prabowo is appealing for a majority of Indonesian people. And especially, as you know, that if you are not the super elite, and you have a problem with the law, then it's very difficult to expect a fair law, because most of corrupt legal officers want to take your money away, and you might even be sentenced to jail even if you are innocent. So they feel hopeless, and they think that the only thing that can solve this problem is if suddenly God give them a strong leaders to take care of all these corrupt officials, and also all injustices, including in the formal system. I think that is my 2 cents, but
Thank you. Gurkit, comment on the really unusual rise of Prime Minister Modi. He's definitely, I think, one of the strongest leaders India has ever had. And I think out of the three presidents, leaders of countries that are engaged here, Indonesia, India, and the United States, certainly Prime Minister Modi what do you call it, shows himself to be a strong man. And in fact, some Indian friends say that there's a cult of personality growing. Do you agree with that?
Unlike the current leadership, or let's say the anticipated leadership in the case of Indonesia and the United States, Prime Minister Modi was the chief minister of a state, which Mr. Prabowo or Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump have not been. So he came with a solid record of good governance and implementation, which was called the Gujarat model. Now, that Gujarat model, they tried to bring to the sector. The jury is out whether that model entirely succeeded in bringing fast-paced development to India. But yes, India is growing at about 7%, which is quite creditable. Though yes, we need 9 to 10%, but we are still growing at 7. Please remember, Indonesia is growing at 5. The United States, I don't know what they are growing at. Now, Prime Minister Modi, as I told you, runs a centralized system. This is what we call the presidentialization of the Prime Minister's office. It is like a presidential system, and it runs on a spoils basis. Now, in Parliament, he changes the candidates for the members every time. Even in state elections, they are already running the government. They are going to win again, and 40% of the candidates will be changed simply to bring fresh faces and give them an experience. So there is a politicization of the party to bring more people in, and they are all beholden to him. I already told you that almost 800 million people get some government benefit or the other through direct benefit transfer. They're all beholden to him. So yes, that leads to, well, you may call it a personality cult, they like to call it a charisma, a charismatic relationship with his people. And he uses the social media, holograms. Yesterday, I saw Imran Khan in Pakistan with an AI message. So I think AI messages are coming now. Modi's election machinery is almost perfect. And it wins because they are basing themselves on his popularity. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Let me go back to Dr. Brian now. Dr. Brian, I'm watching the news in the United States, and there are a lot of issues about the borders, the insecurity feel by many Americans about immigrants coming illegally into the United States. I had a dinner with an American friend the other day, and she said that Biden may lose because the war in the United States, sorry, the war in the Middle East, and the swing states have many Muslim voters who would, Muslim and Arab voters who would probably vote against Biden in those small number of swing states. And so I'm just wondering if is identity politics going to be important in U.S. elections this year?
Yes, it perhaps will be the most important. Immigration is a very serious issue for many Americans, but I think it speaks to a broader just difference. And I do want to kind of echo, it seems that some of the comments that both panelists, but particularly Beng's comments just a couple of minutes ago, seem very, very similar to what I'm seeing in the United States. If your image of the United States is news headlines from New York or Washington, most Americans are not in the major American cities. They are in other areas that are perhaps not as economically vibrant. They're experiencing economic troubles, but they're also experiencing kind of cultural and identity-based dislocation, for lack of a better word. And they see the media, they see the universities, they see the government as run by urban elites, and they've been looking for a strong, king, populist leader. And Donald Trump, former President Trump, has filled that role. And so we see this clash of identities. Is America going to be the urban, more educated, economically vibrant, welcoming of immigrants kind of country? Or is America going to be a little bit more for America and Americans and people who have been here for a longer period of time, or perhaps been here for generations? And that is the real clash between the vision that former President Trump brings versus the vision of President Biden and the American Democratic Party. So to the extent that there are voters who very much think that allowing immigrants into the country changes our cultural identity, they will be very motivated by that fear. And if they are in a very, again, I can answer this if there's questions in the question and answer period about the nature of the electoral college we use to elect the president. But in the important states, American states in the electoral college, if those states are close and identity politics is a key factor, yes, immigration and other kind of cultural identity issues will certainly play the biggest role in determining their votes. The American economy is doing well by the standards of kind of advanced industrialized democracies. Our growth is between 2% and 3%. Inflation is coming down in this country. The economic factors seem to point toward a president who should be reelected. But that's not the case. The election between Biden and Trump will be very, very close. And I do want to say one thing before I stop, specifically to the voters that you alluded to, the Muslim American voters. Many of them are in Michigan. Some of them are in Minnesota. I mean, obviously, there are Muslim Americans spread throughout this country, but Michigan in particular could be a very close race. And those voters are upset with President Biden's foreign policy toward the conflicts in the Middle East. I would point out that former President Trump has been even more staunchly a defender of Israel and it has a closer relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu than Biden does. So I don't think that these voters would necessarily vote for Trump because that's a very pro-Israel candidate, former President Trump. But if they just failed to vote for Biden, if they deny him the votes by just not voting, then that might allow President Trump's other supporters in Michigan to help him to carry that state. So many American elections are decided by domestic issues, and many Americans don't think extensively about American foreign policy when deciding how to vote. But immigration and the conflict in the Middle East this year might be the exception to that tendency.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to Dr. Gurjit. In the U.S. elections in 2000, I forget what it was, 16, I think, there was a lot of talk about so-called Russian interference in the U.S. elections. I'm just wondering, in India's case, do you worry about any foreign interference, or do you think that it's all good for India? It's all your domestic matters with no foreign interference?
See, the internet has advantages of taking your message across many people, which the Modi electoral machine has used well. But the internet can be used by anybody. So there have been radical elements overseas who have used the internet to influence parts of India. India is too vast and complicated for anybody to influence all of India. But there are. So one name which comes to mind readily is Canada. Canada is now openly being accused of interfering in India's internal affairs, leading to the downsizing of their diplomatic mission by 41 diplomats. Now, I don't want to go into the larger details, but this has been going on for some time, and I think India was quietly accepting it unless somebody decided to blow it up. But having said that, I think there is this feeling, and you were talking about Muslims. Now, India has the world's largest Muslim population after Indonesia. In the past, they tended to vote as a bloc and therefore influence a substantial number of seats in India. Under the BJP-ruled electoral mechanics, they have brought the Hindu vote together by overcoming caste and class differences and giving them one identity, which has allowed them to overpower the aggregation of the Muslim vote in some pockets. But now the Hindu vote is aggregated almost across the country. But I see now that in the new nominations coming up for upper house seats, for governors, for other people, the BJP is carefully crafting which caste the chief minister will come from, which caste his deputy will come from. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, if you had united all Hindus under one, then why do you need this balancing? But perhaps these are the mechanics under which you do that unity. Now, this feeling that some are enemies extends to Pakistan. Pakistan, enemy number one. And this has become an issue in Indian elections. The security of India, terrorism from Pakistan, and that. But you see now India's relationship with Saudi Arabia, UAE is the best ever. So it's not as if we have used Islam is bad as a card and therefore ruined our relationship with the world of Islam. Even in the Gaza, India has a very nuanced and balanced approach of Israel as a strategic partner, but a two-state solution being the only solution to the Palestine. So I think India plays a nuanced role. We do not allow our domestic politics to necessarily impinge on our foreign policy, but the fact that you could have religious aggregations play a role, which could then be used by others, I think that has diminished physically, increased incrementally because of the internet.
Thank you. Pak Bambang, I want to talk a little bit about what I would call the politics of self-contradiction. You know, if I open up the YouTube or social media in Indonesia, it's full of accounts of politicians, leaders, opposition, who just saying things that contradicts what they said or what they believe or the position they took 5 or 10 years ago, right? It's full of it. I see this in the United States also, how they describe politicians in those ways. My question to you, Pak Bambang, is consistency overrated? I mean, should voters now just discount consistency as a value in the way they choose leaders? Should they just accept that, you know, everyone is going to be contradicting themselves at some point? So yes, let's not think that that's an important thing. Yeah, what do you think, Pak Bambang?
Well, I think it's people are learning and they're getting better at believing this so-called video proof or digital proof, because many of them are actually cut out of context. Yeah. So now people starting to at least step back before believing what they saw on video or something. They think, is this just a cut out part which misled me or not? Yeah. I have to admit it's still a very small portion of people there, but it's growing quite fast. I think people are more critical, and so I think in a way we are slowly getting prepared for artificial intelligence, because now people start to learn that don't believe what you see yourself until you can get some sort of confirmation from more trusted sources. Yeah. But about inconsistencies, I think this is not only Indonesian politicians. I think this is politicians all over the world, and I think it's in a way there is a good side and bad side of it. The good side of it is that people now take politician as it is, not as somebody who like half god, that not somebody that they supported no matter what. So they know that human is fallible, but they will see the consistency on whatever you do. What is your who do you want to help? I mean, you can see politicians who are more likely to side with the super rich. There are politicians who are also in a way maybe not consistent in saying A or B, but quite consistent in always siding with the 99%, for instance. And people started to learn this, to be more politically smart. So, but in the meantime, of course, we have to pay the transition cost. Some of our politicians is still regarded as almost half god by their supporters. But the inconsistency of this half god actually make them become more like human. It happened actually to President Jokowi now. I think used to have a lot of people who never question that he is a good president, but now because of his own inconsistencies, he's losing some of his inner circle. Yeah. And one, you lost your inner circle, and your inner circle speak out about what really happened. Then people start to understand there are other vulnerabilities of our politicians, so they don't just support them like they are supporting, a fans club. So they are learning to become no more a fans club, but a critical supporter. I think in a slow but sure way, it's good education for all of us. But of course, we have to pay the school fees for that. Yeah, we made mistake, but that's part of life, I guess.
Thank you. Let me take some questions now. This first question is for Dr. Brian, I think. It's from Syed Khalid Sazad from Afghanistan. I'm reading it. Syed asked, despite the United States' assertion of championing democracy, its involvement in Afghanistan has been marked by complexities, particularly with recent to the return of Taliban to power. How do the perceived shortcomings of U.S. intervention in Afghanistan, despite its democratic rhetoric, reflect on its commitment to fostering democracy abroad? Dr. Brian?
Well, this is a complicated question, particularly in light of American elections coming up. I want to answer this kind of in two stages. I think in terms of kind of the political or the elite level, America cares very deeply about promoting democracy abroad. The problem that we've faced as a country with our foreign policy toward Afghanistan is that we have foreign policy power diffused across separated presidency and our national legislature, Congress, as well as we've had turnover in the presidency several times since American involvement in Afghanistan following September 11th, 2001. So we've gone from a Republican to a Democrat to a Republican to a Democrat. I believe that the goal has always been to provide a stable democracy. Now, perhaps that's a problem. We shouldn't be trying to provide anything other than being a good role model, but obviously America has been very deeply involved in Afghanistan. But former President Trump decided that we did not want to play a role in trying to militarily possess and kind of help the Afghanistan to govern themselves. So he negotiated a deal to withdraw American troops. It's unclear to me what America can do without a presence in the country to promote democracy in that country, given the preferences of the Taliban, given its otherwise kind of isolation from a lot of the world system. That right now we have a very strong divide among political elites as to what level of engagement America needs to play in the world, even if both American political parties care about promoting democracy. All of that said, the second level I do want to mention is that many Americans, again, I mentioned this briefly before, are not very well versed in American foreign policy, and they tend not to vote very much on American foreign policy. I do believe immigration, and when I say immigration, I'm talking primarily about immigration across our southern border. Immigration from Canada, our northern border south, is not a political issue, okay? Immigration from, other countries through our airports is not an issue. When we talk about American immigration being a political issue, we're talking primarily about Mexicans and Central and South Americans flowing north through our southern border. So that's not a global foreign policy issue. That's very much a regional foreign policy issue. And obviously, the conflict in the Middle East will be a foreign policy issue, but I suspect many Americans will, it's kind of a strong word, but I won't say forgotten about Afghanistan, but it just will not be on the top of their minds when deciding whom to vote for. So this is really an elites only situation. How America can support democracy the rule of law and individuals in Afghanistan who are perhaps not being treated well by the Taliban. But it is definitely not something that will affect this election, to be brutally honest about it.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to follow up with Pa Gurjit. India is the largest democracy in the world, and we know in the United States foreign policy, the projection of democracy as their foreign policy values has always been strong. Yeah, it goes up and down, of course, but these values are underpin U.S. foreign policy. How does it work with India? Because of course India adheres to the principle of non-interference, the Bandung principles also, and so on. But what is India's attitude, foreign policy attitude, in terms of the projection of democracy? Is that something important for Indian foreign policy or not so?
You know, I'm reminded of Pa Bambang magazine carrying a last page article by former Foreign Minister Hassan Virayuda after the governments in Egypt kept falling. And this is after training in democracy was conducted by IPD Bali, the Institute of Peace and Democracy, right? And Hassan Virayuda wrote that you can't teach democracy to people. I think he was very sensible. So I think Indian foreign policy does not have promotion of democracy as an objective. We respect democracy. We do believe that countries which are democratic should have a better relationship with us, but we have dealt with dictators equally well. So I don't think that it is a preferred policy option for India, a default option. We don't want to give up our democracy now or ever. But am I going to prescribe it to others? I can share my experience. Yeah, we had it good. But will I not talk to you if you are not democratic or you run a kind of a, as Pa Bambang said, faulty democracy? I don't think that's part of India's ethos. Right.
Thank you. There's a question from Reza. Reza Hashim Zakarian. He asked about, I'm going to ask Bambang to address this question. How about the attitude of young people in facing elections? Since in Indonesia's elections, they are said to be the determinant factor, the make or break factor in election results. So what is your view on how the young people see elections and democracy? Pak Bambang.
Yeah, thank you. If I look at the detail in various poll that is usually quite a credible poll, yeah, even though that the proportion of young people or young voter is very dominant, but if you look at their voting behavior, it's almost quite similar than other voter age. So I think probably many Indonesian young voters, and I'm talking about majority which not the one who live in Jakarta and highly educated, because I think maybe 70% of our people is not highly educated. I think most of them follow the family decision on voters. But of course, this is the exception is like the young people, which is a member of Pak Dino Jalal FPCI. They are very highly sophisticated and they are independent, and they are most of them are very rational and smart voters. But people like in FPCI is an exceptions, not the rule in Indonesia. So I can say if you look at our statistic, less than 10% of our population has university or college degree. So then, I guess our behavior in election is still more emotional than rational or even a critical what you call it rational. Most of them will go with the flow. So that's why you can see Pak Prabowo campaign, for instance, following the Marcos. They don't talk much about highly sophisticated policies, but how basically saying, don't worry, be happy and continue our good life. Because that's a very simple message that probably appeal to people who are not have a lot of time to think critically about their political decision, because they're already very busy just trying to survive for everyday life.
Thank you, Pak Bambang. Now let me take a question from Mansur Hassan Zada from Pakistan. I think this is addressed to Pak Gurjit. In recent elections, there have been concerns about the influence of dirty votes on the democratic process. How is the authority addressing such challenge to ensure fair and transparent elections? Pak Gurjit, yeah.
We have and the election commission at the national level and state election commissions. So just when the elections are called, then a code of conduct sets in. And instead of the executive officials in charge, it is the election commission which takes over the administration. So the chief minister of a state cannot transfer people, cannot issue new freebies or take policy decisions in the period of the code of conduct. So therefore, most governments will do everything they have to do before the code of conduct kicks in. Once the code of conduct is there, you follow the diktat of the election commission. And if they find any official infringing that or showing partisanship, they replace the official. So the election commission is our go-to person for trying to run a free and fair election. Can vote rigging be absolutely removed? I think through electronic voting machines, we have removed the threat of ballot stuffing. Gunmen coming, taking over a booth, taking the ballot, stamping them, shoving it to the box. Can't happen now. Because even if you take over an EVM, if an EVM has 999 consecutive votes to the same person, it will close down, it will shut down on the 1000. So there are inbuilt checks and things. But yes, people can tinker with voters list and they can offer money, things like that happen. But I have come to the conclusion as a political analyst that times are changing. Voter behavior is changing. We tend to look down on the results of current voter behavior because it does not conform to the kind of result we had in our time or we expect now. If we respect the voter, I think we will understand emerging voter behavior better. There's no point saying this is wrong because I disagree. Yes, as a voter, you may disagree and you can vote for whoever you like. But if you are outvoted by large majority, you can't condemn everybody as uneducated or disorganized or populist or whatever. That is the way democracy works. We are not a functioning oligarchy or a plutocracy. We are a democracy. So these are the frailties of a democracy. To call them dirty under any circumstance, I think is a bit unfair. Thank you.
Thank you. We got 9 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to close by asking each of the panelists, what makes them hopeful about democracy and elections in their country? I know all of us are full of challenges in our own ways, but despite all that, what makes you hopeful? Perhaps it's good to end on that positive note. Yeah, I'll start with Dr. Brian.
Yes, the thing that makes me hopeful, I think, is the engagement of the American voter. I mean, I think that there are some very important issues, not just about policy, but about the state of American democracy. And I think a lot of Americans are paying attention. I think turnout will be moderate to high in the American elections in November. And I think a lot of people are paying attention. Perhaps not yet, but over the course of the summer and then into the autumn, Americans will pay attention and will see two candidates and two parties with very different visions for the future of the United States, both domestically as well as our role in the world. And they will take their decision very seriously. So as a political scientist, as a university teacher, it pleases me to see people engaged and to see people participating and exercising their democratic rights. So even amidst our challenges, I think the only way to solve problems with democracy is through more democracy. So I think American engagement is what gives me the most hope.
By the way, just a quick follow-up to that, the January 6th riot. Has America recovered from that psychologically?
No, and I don't think that we will. I mean, eventually we will, but I don't think we will necessarily in the course of this year. Currently, former President Trump is being charged with crimes related to instigating that riot. And he considers that to be politically motivated charges as opposed to sincere allegations of a crime. And that trial perhaps could play out over the course of this political campaign. So I really don't think that we will get past the January 6th riot until former President Trump leaves the political scene. He'll either lose in November and probably be done with politics, or he'll win in November and have 4 years as president, and then through term limits be done with politics. So at some point, I think we will get past this, but not this year.
Thank you. Dr. Gurjit, what makes you hopeful?
I quite agree with Christopher. Now, I think the sheer engagement of the Indian people with the process of democracy is amazing. I expect the voting percentage to cross 70 at the next general election, which will be a new record. The involvement of youth in determining their own future is extremely important. They will be the ones who will set the democratic traditions of our country. Democratic tradition means the democratic process must remain integral and have its integrity, and yet the people that we elect must be providing us good governance. And I think that is what makes me hopeful.
Thank you. Final word, Bambang. Pak Bambang, are you there? Okay, I think he must left somehow. We have come to the end of our session. It's been really a fascinating session, a lot of insights and a lot of good analysis, and certainly has opened up my perspective on the democracies challenges in Indonesia, India, and United States. Once again, I want to thank all the panelists, Dr. Brian, Pak Bambang, and Pak Gurjit for joining our discussions today. We'll have more sessions. We plan to have twice a month global town hall series sessions. If you have any suggestions on what topic we should address, please let us know. But mainly thank you for joining our discussions, and a big, huge thanks to all our panelists, and see you in our next Global Town Hall and then FPCI discussions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Padino, for moderating the discussion. And thank you also to all the speakers for sharing your incredible insight. Before we wrap up the event, I would like to invite the speakers and all the participants for a short photo session. Everyone, please have your brightest smile. You can open your camera. I will wait for a few seconds. Okay. On my count, 1, 2, 3. Okay, once more. On my count, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. It has been a very fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the audience found the session is very interesting and highly informative. Today's event will be available for rewatch on the FPCI official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. You will see in the chat box a link for everyone to fill in and claim the e-certificates. So please make sure to fill in the details correctly, as the e-certificates will be sent to your email directly. Once again, thank you everyone for tuning in to today's discussion. You can follow our social media handles for more information about our activities, event, and programs via Instagram at FPC Indo and at Global Town Hall. Also, do stay tuned to our next Global Town Hall series. See you at the next FPCI event.